Before you watch this video, we would appreciate it if you subscribe to us. Useful videos are prepared for you every week in the Knowledge Cafe. Since December 2019, when it was first reported in Wuhan, province of Hubei, China, the new virus SARS-CoV-2 has spread rapidly around the world and has become a global pandemic. During the COVID-19 pandemic, due to the public health measures implemented, people's sexual activity has also been affected. Restrictions on people's activities, reduced sports activities, economic issues, increased psychological stress, and reduced entertainment have, indeed, dramatically impacted sexual activity and functioning. The purpose of this study was to systematically identify, collect and summarize the existing body of evidence from published studies on the effects of COVID-19 pandemic on sexual activity and functioning. Several scholarly databases, namely Medline, Web of Science, Embase, CINAHL, the Cochrane Library, Scopus, and PSYC-INFO databases, were mined from December 2019 to the end of January 2021. We utilized a random effect meta-analytical model to analyze all the data. More in detail, the standardized mean difference was used in order to estimate and evaluate the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on sexual activity and functioning. 21 studies were included in the present study. In total, 2,454 women and 3,765 men were evaluated. In the present meta-analysis, sexual functioning and activity were assessed by means of two standardized and reliable tools, namely the Female Sexual Function Index and the International Index of Erectile Function 5 items. A total of 5 studies reported the FSFI score before and after the COVID-19 pandemic in female participants. Based on the random effect model, the SMD was computed to be 4.26, being statistically significant. A total of 3 studies reported the IEF-5 score before and after the COVID-19 pandemic in male participants. Based on the random effect model, the SMD was computed to be 0.66, being statistically significant. In the majority of these studies, participants reported a reduction in the number of sexual relations and an increase in the frequency of solo sex activity, especially masturbation, compared to the time prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. The results of the present study showed that COVID-19 related restrictions were correlated with higher rates of sexual dysfunction and reduced sexual activity. However, results of the current meta-analytical study showed that this change in sexual functioning was greater in women compared to men. Sex is one of the dimensions of every person's life. Therefore, researchers should identify the factors that lead to sexual dysfunction due to COVID-19 pandemic in their community. In this regard, sexologists should design and implement effective programs to reduce the heterogeneous causes affecting sexual functioning, given the psychological strain that the COVID-19 pandemic puts on individuals. While the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and World Health Organization, 2 authorities on containing the virus, have abstained from offering explicit advice on how to handle intimacy during the pandemic, other sources have offered some basic protective measures people can take when they're feeling the urge. Dr. Carlos Rodriguez Diaz: there is no evidence that the COVID-19 can be transmitted via either vaginal or anal intercourse. However, kissing is a very common practice during sexual intercourse, and the virus can be transmitted via saliva. Therefore, the virus can be transmitted by kissing. There is also evidence of oral-fecal transmission of the COVID-19, and that implies that analingus may represent a risk for infection. Meeting someone new? Not so much. Jumping on a dating app, hiring a sex worker, or other ways of connecting with strangers to pass the time in quarantine is not recommended unless you do it virtually. Video dates, sexting, reading erotica to each other over FaceTime, and dropping into chat rooms are all approved as alternative options to hooking up with someone outside your self-isolation zone. Many sex workers have moved their services online and can be supported through services like Patreon, OnlyFans, and various cam sites. These days in quarantine time, fears, anxiety, bad news, not to be good looking, not having good body image, not to go to bar or public effects to the mood of all people is a kind of less libido and less sex because of bored at home, but in another side, because people staying home without a job they need to have sex with their primary or regular wife or husband or partner. Since sex relationship affects the immune system, and boosts immunity against virus infection, avoiding sex is not recommended. So, a kind of monogamous sex seems to be the safest one. I have done lots of studies of stereotypes of single people. Terry Conley and her colleagues have been studying stereotypes of people who have what they call consensually non-monogamous relationships. We have each gone on to answer the next question: are the stereotypes true, or are they mostly myths and prejudices? Conley likes the CDC definition of monogamy. Mutual monogamy means that you agree to be sexually active with just one person, and that person has agreed to be sexually active only with you. Consensually non-monogamous relationships are relationships in which both partners have openly agreed that they and/or their partners will have other sexual or romantic partners. Polyamory involves having consensual loving and romantic relationships with more than one partner. That's different from swinging or open relationships, in which the relationships may be just sexual and not necessarily loving or romantic. But in pandemic time, having a multi-partner is very risky and not recommended.